Welcome to Visual Anthology. In this training session, I'd like to cover how Anthology calculates the cost of an item and how can you modify the cost of goods sold values. We'll be doing this training in version 5.14.6 in case the version you're seeing is newer and maybe a little different in the screens. Before we get started with setting up some of the examples, notice that the Anthology Help system has two options. You can do Help, which will bring up a local copy of the Help system, which is as current as the version that you're using, or if you have high-speed internet access, use the Help on the Web option. This gets you to our Anthology website, to the Help system, which is the most recent version. So do Help on the Web, and that'll bring up the most recent version of the Help system. In particular, the topics that we'll be covering today are kept underneath Special Topics, and then understanding and working with cost of goods sold, with several subtopics underneath it, and also another very good topic, which is understanding sales metrics in Anthology. This topic goes over the major terms that you'll be hearing throughout today and how we define them. Back to the understanding and working with cost of goods sold, there's some very important topics for you to review. This overview is a good place to start. This next subtopic talks about exactly how does Anthology calculate that cost of goods sold. There's some very useful information in here. And then here's the specifics on actually how to modify those cost of goods sold. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. In general, when an item is sold, we're going to try to count back through the receiving history, if there is any, to find the list price that item came in on and the vendor discount given at that time. That list price on the receiving memo minus the vendor discount gives us the approximate cost of an item. At that point, when you're selling an item, we're going to store that COGS or cost of an item in the sales history record so that later on when you're doing, say, a sales history report, that information can be accessed. Note that when you sell an item and we're trying to count back through the receiving history, if there's simply not enough receiving history, we will actually use the very most last receiving memo that it had in hand to do those calculations. If there's no receiving history at all, we'll use a fallback, which is underneath this Master Files Departments. When you set up a new department, you have the option in the Details area to note what your default purchase discount for costing is. And in particular, in the book world, 40% is about right for books. It may be a little higher, a little lower, depending on the situation, but in general, this is a good average percentage to use. Now, hopefully, if you're doing good receiving, this should never have to be used, but sometimes it does. Bear in mind that you only want to use this in the case where your list and retail of an inventory item are identical, like they are in the case of books. If there is no receiving history, we'll take the list price of the inventory item minus this default purchase discount to give us an approximate cost. Now, in the case of, say, a sideline, maybe calendars, where I may mark up the price, my list and retail would not be the same, and my list would be my cost, so I do not want to use my default purchase discount for costing in that sense. And again, this is only a fallback. If you're doing good receiving, you should never have to use this item. This system shouldn't need to use this at all. But it is a good idea to fill it in. So that's how Anthology is going to calculate the cost of an item, by counting back through the receiving history using first in, first out to find the most appropriate receiving memo an item came in on, to calculate its list price minus the vendor discount at that time to give us the approximate cost. We'll store that information with the sales record so that it can be accessed later on. Now, in my examples, I've received a couple of items and received them at a 41% discount because that was my best guess is what I might get. I haven't actually gotten my real invoice, so I don't know for sure what I'm really getting for a discount on those items. In fact, I'll show you what those two items were. I received the light in the attic title on the 14th. I received a 41% discount, or at least I guess that's what I was getting. And so take 41% off of my list price, actually in the receiving list price of $17.99, will give me a cost of $10.61. Notice that I didn't have an invoice number at the time I finished the receiving memo, so this field is blank. I also received on the same order the Where the Sidewalk Ends title, same thing. My receiving list price was $17.99, so take off the 41% from the vendor, gives me a $10.61 cost. And again, no vendor invoice, nothing showing up in this field. Once I received those two items, posted the receiving memo, and put them on the shelves, I sold them as part of my example here. In order to look at my sale information, let's just go back to the cash register, and I'll show you a reprint of my receipt. We go to Cash Register, Actions, Reprint a Receipt, and here's the transaction I had done earlier. You can see that I sold the Where the Sidewalk Ends at its normal price of $17.99. However, with the Light in the Attic title, I sold it at a 25% discount, so I only charged $13.49 for that. This piece of information is useful because we'll be looking at a sales history here in a moment that'll show you how that affected my profit margin and whatnot. Let me close out of this cash register, and let's go take a look at that sales history report. There's my date range, and in this case I'm really just looking at getting some quick information, so the default settings will work just fine. There's my Where the Sidewalk Ends, 1 unit sold, no discount at the time of the sale, so my retail was $17.99. Take off that vendor discount I had gotten when I did my receiving memo of 41%, gives me a cost of $10.61, so my profit is $7.37. There's the margin, and there's the markup. In the case in the Light in the Attic title, however, I did sell it for a 25% discount, so my retail amount was $13.49. My cost was still $10.61, so my profit is somewhat lower, and there's the margin and the markup in reflection. So there's my basic sample of where it stands now, but that means I have two situations I need to correct for. Now that I know my new invoice is coming from the vendor and it looks like I really got 42% instead of 41%. Not only do I need to correct the information for the items I might sell going forward, but I also need to correct the item I've already sold, or the items I've already sold. And to do both of those, I actually need to go back to my receiving area. I also should go in and enter in my new invoice information as well. So I'll go to Inventory Control and go to Receiving. Now most of you will have a slightly different screen. Most of you will probably be set to see just your open receiving memos. And here's where this is set right now. If I uncheck Open POs Only, I'm actually going to ask it, when I hit Search, to show me everything, all the history I've ever done. Now in the case of the receiving memo that I received, that Light in the Attic and Where the Sidewalk Ends title, that was on order number 25. You can see here's my completed order number 25. Again, it's the green record. It's the last known picture of what was going on, or the master record. And then here in the gray shipment status record is information on exactly what I did on that receiving memo when I posted it. So I'll go to my shipment number 25. Actually, receiving memo number 25, shipment number 1. And the first thing I should do is to go in and correct or add on that new invoice number. So go to Actions and do Vendor Invoice Information. So here's my packing slip, and there was my best guess I had made earlier as to what that total would be when I got the real invoice. Well, now that I have my real invoice, I can put in the exact amount that they're giving me. Oh, but I should put in the invoice date and when I expect to have it due. So when I did my packing slip, my best guess was that I was getting 41% vendor discount and that my total would be roughly $165. Well, it turns out that my true invoice that I'm now getting from Ingram says that maybe the grand total is 157, a little bit lower. Now notice that this receipt subtotal over here, 159.21, is the same as the total over here. Now because I got a 42% discount, my total is actually going to be a little bit lower than what I had guessed at first. And because my vendor discount is still showing as 41% on the order, it's not going to match exactly. Notice too that we show you the subtotal over here. Well, we actually need to correct that information because actually they charged me a little bit of shipping and they charged me a little bit of tax. Notice that the subtotal over here is their total amount minus shipping minus tax. Now we do that because typically the industry is counting things like shipping and tax to be a cost of doing business, not necessarily a cost of those items, but we want to break them out a little bit more so they're a cost of doing business. So as a result, we want to get the subtotal amount, the grand total minus any shipping minus any tax, to be equal to our receipt subtotal. Now in this case it's not exact because again my vendor discount is really 42% and I had mine marked with 41%. But I've now entered in my invoice information, my dates are entered, I can keep my packing slip detail in there, I've corrected the total amounts as well. Now because these don't match exactly, I will get an error message, it'll warn me, but I don't have to, I can go on from here. So I'll say save, and now I'm back on my receiving memo. And in fact, if we were to go out to our inventory items, we would immediately start seeing that vendor invoice info. Still have the percentage of 41%, but we'll correct that right now. So as I'm going through and correcting my vendor invoice information, I notice that sure indeed I got 42% instead of 41%. To do that, I need to be back on my shipment record, go to details, and go to actions. There's a couple of steps I need to do here, and I should do them in a particular sequence. The first thing I need to do is actually make a correction to this receiving memo so that if any new items get sold or any more of these items get sold, they'll be sold with the correct cost of goods information. So the first thing to do is to go to actions when I'm in the shipment status record and then go to edit receiving history. You'll notice now that certain fields are lit up. I can change certain pieces of information. I can only change certain ones though. I can't add more titles, I can't take titles off this, nor can I modify the quantities that I received either. I can only really affect the list price, the retail price, the vendor discount, and if there's a lot of items on this, I could mass override all the discount percentages. But in this case, it's just 2 items, so I'll manually go in and I will correct those 2 items to say they actually had a 42% discount. I've entered each line, and of course, don't forget to save. So here's now my updated receiving memo showing me that list price of $17.99 for each item, but now they're both showing 42%. And if you do the math, I believe that turns out to be like $10.43 or something like that. In fact, once we've recalculated this portion to force any new item to have the right cost information stored with it, I can go to the inventory record and look at that. But there is one last step I should do. I need to correct the items that have already been sold. So to do that, go back up to the Actions menu and go to Recalculate Cost of Goods Sold. This goes through and using this now updated information on the receiving memo, we'll go back through the sales history and force those items sold to be recalculated using the corrected information. Now, this is a pretty small order. There's only 2 items on it. They both needed to change. So I'll probably use the all records on the PO. But if there were several items or a rather large order and I just needed to change one, I might do the current record only. But for now, I'll do all records on the PO. You'll notice too that the bottom of this window has another note about needing to run the Tools Roll Sales History option. That's because I am going to go through with this option and correct the sales history, but there's a lot of grids and graphs throughout this program that you'll see on the info panels that really need to be updated as well. So one of the third steps I'll need to do is to re-roll the sales history. I'll get to that in a moment. For now, though, just do F12 recalculate. It's pretty fast. There's not much on this order. So now that the recalculation has been done, those two items that I sold should now have the corrected information for the profit, margin, and markup if I were to go look at the sales history report. Before I do that, though, I should show you how to re-roll the sales history. Now, when you roll the sales history, it's something you usually do after the end of the day, after closing has been done, all your nightly processes are finished, and it may take a few moments, so make sure everybody else is out of Anthology, you don't have any modules open on the machine you're working on, and it may be faster to do this from the server as well. So to re-roll the sales history so those grids and graphs are updated, go to Tools, Roll Sales History. And I usually have this screen set up this way where I'm preserving all three of the customer, station, and user options and tell it to recalculate all history. The reason for this is because I've probably already rolled, and this is part of the Z-tape process, I've already recalculated or calculated the first time the information using the incorrect vendor discount of 41%. So I don't want to do just the unrolled items. I want to do everything. So I'll say all history, and then I'll say run. And again, your system will have a lot more sales information than this demo data does. So when you say yes to recalculate rolled sales history, be prepared for this to run a little bit. Now you can see mine is going pretty quickly, but yours will take a little bit more time. Once it's done, however, it says it's complete. You can either hit the space bar or click anywhere on the screen to get out of that. So to do a quick recap, if I need to correct my vendor invoice information, I'll go to Receiving, make sure I'm on the shipment record, go to Details, go to Actions, do vendor invoice information first to correct any detail I might have, and then also do Actions, edit receiving history to enable certain fields that need to change, such as the price or the discount, save my changes, and then do another Actions, recalculate cost of goods sold, and then do the roll sales history at the end of that day. Let's go take a look at what effect it had on those items. So here's the light in the attic title. Remember, our cost was $10.61, but now because we got a vendor discount of 42% instead, our cost has dropped a little bit, so now it's $10.43. And again, there's the vendor invoice information. Same thing for the Where the Sidewalk Ends title. Discount has gone up. Discount off of our vendor's receiving memo list price gives us a cost of $10.43. So that's corrected the items going forward. Let's see if it corrected the items that we'd previously sold. Go to Reports, Sales History, Print, and Preview. So here is the one item of each that I sold, the $17.99 that I sold to Where the Sidewalk Ends on, and for the light in the attic, that $17.99 minus that 25% discount means we collected only $13.49 for that title. The cost is still the same, but notice the profit shows the new change. Excuse me, the cost is the same for both of them, even though I sold one of them in the cash register for a discount. This is the cost of the inventory item. Previously, they were $10.61 because it was a 41%, not 42%. There's the new profit and margin and market values. That should pretty much do it with how Anthology calculates the cost of goods sold and how you can modify that information. Don't forget, you really would want to have the help system open in case you need some prompting on how to do some of those steps. Again, that's under Special Topics, Understand and Working with Cost of Goods Sold. Some good information underneath that, and also perhaps the Building Sales Metrics in Anthology, or excuse me, Understanding Sales Metrics in Anthology. That should do it.